Production support for Hot and Cold is brought to you by American Solar Technics, manufacturers of components for wood burning and solar heating systems. Hey, I'm Tom Gocze. This week on Hot and Cold, we're going to look at pellet stoves and getting ready for winter and what we can do with pellet stoves to keep us warm and keep us happy and almost, not quite, but almost work like central heating. Not quite, but close. So we're in my shop again, which is where we shoot most of our shows, and I have an oil system up there that came with the building, and I don't like it. I don't like buying oil. I don't mind buying oil, but I'm not crazy about it. I'd rather spend my money here in the state of Maine. So I actually hunted up, and they're around now because they've been around for a few years. I've hunted up some used pellet stoves that were in pretty good shape. I actually bought these from a local hearth store. And we have two different kinds to show you, just to give you an idea of what to look for when you're buying a used stove in particular. New stoves have a lot more features, but used stoves have possibilities, especially if you're on a really tight budget. This one I picked up, this is a Whitfield. It does not have automatic ignition. It does have a nice big hopper though, to hold the pellets. We can get a lot of pellets in here. We're using pellets from the mill in East Corinth, Maine, which make very good quality pellets. They've been doing it for a couple of years now. You can see the stove is a little worn looking. If I got some stove black, which I haven't done yet, I could clean this up a bit. I don't care so much about the aesthetics. I do because I don't want the stove to be really beat, because that's an indication to me that it may have had a really hard life. But I'm more concerned about what's inside the stove. And when I got the stove, it was full of ashes and stuff, but I got beyond that and cleaned it and made sure that everything was okay. You'll probably have to come in close, camera person. A couple of interesting things about these stoves. The Whitfield has an ash pan down the bottom here, which you have to turn the funny thing is, with working with several different stoves, that's supposed to be in. There we go. Some have ash pans, some don't. This one does. There's little clean outs here that should be closed. Right now they're open. That allow you to move ash out of the burn pot when the stove is off. And there's all these stoves have a shutdown cycle. When you shut them off, they just don't go boom off. They go slowly, taper down, burn what remaining pellets are in the stove. What's cool about pellets, we've talked about this before in other shows, but what's cool about pellets is it's wood fuel, but it's very small pieces of wood fuel. And what that allows us to do is carburate or mix air really well with the wood. When you get a stick of wood, let me grab, as a juxtaposition, allow me to grab regular wood. Okay, this is a piece of regular wood. We have a wood stove we use. And when you go to burn this, you've got to start to burn off the surface, and we make wood gas, and that combusts and makes the house warm, and eventually that all burns away. It's really hard to carburate this. Anytime you burn something, you have to mix air with it to make it burn. It's kind of hard to get air to mix with a hunk of wood. It's really easy to get air to mix with little pellets. And what we have here, if you look at the burn pot where the pellets go, when the pellets are in here, there's all these little holes, and those are for air to blow through, for forced draft. So to start this off, we fill the burn pot as such, and we can light it off. The pellet stoves can direct vent. Because they burn so clean, because we get really good combustion, mixture of air with the fuel, we don't get creosote in these stoves. We do get fly ash, and that's what you see in here. This is fly ash. That's the combustion byproduct. That's the ash that would be in the bottom of a regular stove, but you can see there's no creosote in here. As such, where they burn so clean, and they have a blower that is either pushing air in or pulling air out, or sometimes two blowers doing both, we can go right out through the side of the building, and we'll show you that in a little bit on another stove. This stove is tied to a chimney, and if we have the clearance to combustibles, and we do here, usually when you buy a used stove in particular, you don't always get a manual with it. I went online, there was no manual with the stove, and I looked up the Whitfield Advantage Plus, and there was the manual. I downloaded the manual, printed it out, and I got two manuals. There was the installation manual and the operation manual. And the installation manual tells you how to hook it up, tells you what the clearances are supposed to be. Usually, if all else fails, I lost my tape measure, it would be 3 feet to anything combustible. I've got this metal piece of equipment behind me here. That's not combustible, but we have 3 feet to the flue, the back of the stove, it's less, and the side clearance is not much, doesn't have to be much. So we've did everything to meet code. We're on a concrete floor, so we don't have to worry about combustible surfaces here. Most pellet stoves can be on combustible floors, but this area out here has to be non-combustible, like a hearth. And I think it just makes sense to have the whole stove on a non-combustible surface, whether you need it or not. It just makes good common sense. So so that's part of the stove. The other part, now this particular stove has an air inlet adjust, which is right here. And when you start up, you pull it out all the way. And when you have it running, you push it in, and it's settable. There used to be a knob on here. There's not anymore. If we pop the cover off, we can take a look at some of the inner workings of the stove here. I'm going to take the door right off. I'm going to try to take the door right off. The door comes right off. There we go. And if we come around this side, we can see here it's a little dusty. Pellet stoves always get dusty, okay, because of the nature of the fuel and the fact they're always pulling air through. I have actually vacuumed this out because it was really dusty. It still is kind of dusty. I could go over it again and clean it a little more, but it's pretty clean considering what it was. If you have a pellet stove, it always makes sense, whether it's a new one or a used one, to maybe once a year get in and gently vacuum. Be careful of the wires, unplug everything before you get started. But you can see here, this is the exhaust. On the back side of the stove here, we've got, most pellet stoves have an outlet that is 3-inch diameter, but most stove pipes are 4-inch. So in this case, we've bushed up to 4-inch. I've got a T here, and I've got T's at all the, have a couple elbows in this to allow me to easily clean out. So if I take the screws off of this and pull this cap off the bottom, any fly ash that would, if I had an elbow here, there would be no place for fly ash to go. Where there's a T here, any fly ash that might accumulate in the pipe will drop down here. I can easily take this off, even do it while the stove's running if I wanted to, but take this off, dump the fly ash, inspect up with a mirror and a light, and do that wherever there's an elbow. Whether this is a wood stove or a pellet stove, I think using a T like this with the cap makes a lot of sense. Just thinking about where ash might go, where creosote might go, to try to make sure that we can easily clean the thing. Anytime you put stovepipe together, 3 screws minimum, and we use self-drilling screws so it goes together very quickly. You go to almost any hardware store or hearth store and get flue pipe. In this case, we used galvanized because this is a pellet stove and it doesn't get very hot, so it's not going to be hot enough to burn off the galvanized. We don't want to use galvanized pipe for wood stoves particularly because it's usually too thin and if the wood stove runs too hot, which shouldn't be the case, but it can actually burn off the zinc, and that stinks and isn't good for you to breathe. So in this case, it doesn't matter. You can see here, nothing's burned off. This has been used because it is, all the galvanized is intact. On the back side of the stove here, we have a little connector here with 2 wires. That is actually a hookup for a thermostat. Now, this is not a stove that will start up on its own, but once you get it running, you can set it up with the thermostat. We're running wires all over the place here. And in this case, this is the thermostat for the oil system. This is the thermostat for the stove. We're not using the stove right now, but we're going to light it off in a minute. You see it's 67 degrees in here. This stove is here for a couple of reasons. It doesn't have an on-off feature. A lot of pellet stoves have automatic ignition. When it reaches whatever the set temperature is for the room, the stove will shut down and maintain the room within a degree. So it'll shut down. If the temperature drops, it'll start itself up again. This stove does not do that, and a lot of older stoves don't. They have what's called a pilot feature. It's kind of like a pilot light, just trickles a little bit of pellets in to keep the fire going. So you always have a little bit of energy coming out. That is really good for down here. This is a big shop. This is the only heat I'm going to use for backup in the winter. During the day, we may have a wood stove or a boiler that we're operating, but at night and weekends when I'm not here, we've done it with no heat. It gets a little chilly by Monday morning, but this will maintain the room at whatever I set it at. And I've got this, or I have the luxury of this, and I know this building will not freeze to a point where pipes burst and stuff. I'm setting, this is a setback thermostat, setting it back to 45 degrees at nighttime when we're not here in the winter, because it will do it. So if we wanted to start this baby up, there is another panel on the side here which has the controls, and there's an on-off start. We've already opened the damper. We just hit the button and we can start it. But before we do that, this is going to be fun to try. To start this kind of fire, you use gel fluid, gelled alcohol. I don't have any gelled alcohol, but what I do have is in the world of H1N1, I've got gelled hand cleaner, so, which is gelled alcohol. So we're just going to put some of that in there, and we're going to hit the on switch. And you can hear the blowers going, and the pellets will start to come. And I always use a blowtorch to start fires. I'm not sure why that is, but you can see the fire started there. And you can see a little bit of a blue flame. You don't use this stuff around fire. And that will start up on its own and give us a good clean burn. So we'll let that start. It'll take a few minutes. You can see the fire starting to take off now. The pellets are ignited. The auger is slowly feeding in pellets during the startup phase here. Of course, I had filled the burn pot initially, so we'll leave this go for a little while. And actually, you know, the thermostat probably isn't even calling for heat because the room is so warm. Let's bump that up a little. Yeah, I've got it set for 63. It's very Spartan around here. So put that up to 68, let it do its thing. Yeah, it's ramping up a little bit. And we have another stove to look at. Completely different, another used stove that we picked up. And let's go take a peek at that one. Okay, so we're upstairs in our office space now, and we have another stove. This is an area where occasionally it's nice to have some heat. This is a cozy heat. This is a little bit newer stove. I love this stove, and I tell you why, because the side swing out, everything is really easy to access for service. Look at this. There's a, you know, there's a thing. There's a draft sensor. There's blower back here. Look how everything is kind of spread out. Real easy to access for the service person. I like it when I don't have to fight things and go all over things. I can't say that about every pellet stove I've worked on. It's got a little lever down here that allows you to clean the burn pot without having to scrape anything. There's an ash pan underneath here as well. And this has a little control panel in the back here that you can swing down I guess you pick it up and swing it down like that if you want it out of the way. But this is fairly simple. There's an on-off there. And that will start feeding in pellets. A little bit louder blower. Of course, this is coming on full tilt right away, blower-wise. And what this is going to start to do is now feed in the pellets. This has an automatic igniter. The automatic igniter is just an electric heater, a little electric heater about that big with fins on it, and it gets real hot. And they blow air across it, and it's hidden underneath the burn pot here, and that air that's coming in to mix with the pellets gets superheated and gets hot enough to set these suckers on fire. So that works out real well. Up here we're on a combustible floor, we're on a plywood floor. So we put a piece of cement board down because we didn't want to have any issues. At some point we'll probably tile this when we finish the room up, make it look a little more presentable. Where we're on the second floor, there was no flue to tie into, so we got a direct vent kit and we went right out the wall with a straight pipe. Very simple, and we'll come around the side here, we can take a peek at that. Okay, again we got the 3-inch flue pipe like we had on the other stove. You see it's screwed in place, and here we have the direct vent pipe, which is a dual wall pipe. It's got an air space in between. It goes out through a thimble in the wall. The thimble is about 8 inches in diameter. This is about 4 inches in diameter, and there's an air space in between. Actually, this I think has rock wool insulation as well, and it's safe to go outdoors. We've got this caulked with high temperature silicone caulk. There's a special silicone caulk for caulking these connections on pellet stoves. There's a fresh air inlet here if it's required. Most houses it would never be required, so it's just throttled back and it's adjustable. There's a lot of adjustments on this stove. Some stoves are pretty idiot-proof. They don't have any adjustments. This one has adjustments, so we can fine-tune things a little bit. Again, here is that wire. That white wire we saw on the other stove, we got a connection here for a thermostat. In this case, we have the thermostat far away from the stove because the room is big enough, and if it was right next to the stove, it would get warm here and maybe be cold over there. By having the thermostat over there, it's very easy for us to get the room more evenly heated. Downstairs, where it's a big open room, heat's rising off the stove and it goes everywhere, and it doesn't really matter that the thermostat is only a few feet away from the stove. Here in a contained space, it does. So that's the reason that we have the thermostat remotely located. This stove is only about a year old, and we picked it up used, and it was in really good shape, and we're very happy with it. This, although it has an automatic igniter, and come on, oh boy, look at that. It made fire. Is that cool? I didn't play with the torch. I didn't have any hand cleaner, no alcohol gel, nothing. Just the magic of the pellet stove. And it already lit itself off. Tell me that's not cool. That's what's nice about pellet stove. Now this stove will not shut itself off. This will maintain a pilot mode as well. So it'll throttle way back and just keep a little fire going, which is great in the wintertime. The thermostat in this case can set the room back to whatever we want it set to. The pilot mode will just keep a little fire going, and when in the dead of winter, it'd be absolutely fantastic because just a little bit of heat coming into the room. If it starts to cool down too much, the thermostat says, says to the stove, hey, start up again, and it'll start up very quickly. We don't have to wait for that igniter to come on. Saves on the igniter too, because that is a consumable part. You got this little thing, size of my pinky, getting hot enough to ignite pellets. It's going to tend to maybe wear out a little prematurely, having to go on and off all the time. Maintaining the pilot mode is, you know, an alternative scheme for keeping, making your stove hardware last longer. Anyway, that is so cool, isn't it? I love that. The other thing this one has that I kind of like is it has a cleaner up here. This is a scraper. There's tubes here that the heat's coming out of, and those tubes are on the other side are heated by the fire. And there's a scraper here that we can go back and forth and clean those tubes to get any fly ash that's on there off. So the cleaning is very simple. Occasionally we get inside and wipe things down, but this does a good job of doing it. It's a little clunky, but it works. That's pretty much it. Another stove, completely different. Again, we're looking for not a lot of wear and tear, a little bit of stuff on the glass can be clean. So if you see dirty glass, it's not a big deal. If the glass is broken, you can buy replacement glass. There's parts for both stoves all over the place. You can look on the internet. Both stove companies are in business, so you can buy spare parts. Before we go too far, before we run out of time, I should say, let's go outside, just take a quick look at the vent for this, because you've seen now just about everything related to these two stoves except for where the smoke goes. So that's the outside of the pipe. It was cut in, as you can see, pretty straightforward. It's stainless steel at the outlet, and that gets taken off. Again, that nozzle is screwed on, and that comes off so we can clean the pipe on occasion. The other vent pipe next to it is an old gas vent. There used to be an old gas heater in here many eons ago. We've got to get up on the ladder and take that out and side it over with clapboards. I guess we've got to paint too. Ooh. Okay, so we're still in startup mode here. I'm going to push the damper in now, and you can see the fire change a little bit. I'm going to pull that out just a little. We want a little bit of, there's a balancing point here that we have to have that's right for this stove. So some fine tuning. Like I said, some stoves you don't have to mess with. Other ones allow you to fine tune, and the fine tuning is kind of nice given differences in vent systems, differences in how tight the house is, how much air is coming in, differences in pellets. That's a big one. But this is throwing out a nice load of heat. Now, this is a different fire than a wood fire. It's not as pretty probably as a wood fire. You can hear this stove is fairly quiet. It's now in full operational mode compared to the other stove. We can turn the blower up and down if we want to. We'll leave it right where it is. It doesn't matter in a shop like this if we want to have a blower on high or low. That one upstairs was on high, and we could turn that down as well, but we didn't. And that's pretty much it. You know, this is a backup heater. Both are really backup heaters to our regular heat that we use, which is stickwood. And we'll probably go through a couple of ton of pellets. But in this building last year, we ran a tank of oil and 3 cords of wood. And we maintained it somewhat comfortably. This year will be a little bit more comfortable. The money we spent on oil, or would have spent on oil, we'll spend on pellets, and we're spending it locally, which is kind of a nice thing. So that's a joyous part of living in the state of Maine, is the fact that we do have indigenous fuels we can take advantage of. And you know, as a business owner, I want to spend my money with people close by. I want to keep the money here in the state of Maine. Hope you do that too, if you can. And if you can't, don't feel guilty. Just try to be conservative when you do these things. And these are nice opportunities to get an alternative heating system in your house for not a lot of money. New stoves, whether it be wood stoves or pellet stoves, are eligible for tax credit. So check that out. The hardware store you look at, stoves with, will have all that information for you. And we're good to go. All we need now is some snow. Production support for Hot and Cold is brought to you by American Solar Technics, manufacturers of components for wood burning and solar heating systems.